everyone. My name is Courtney, and I'm a grad student in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology in the Courtney lab. So anthropogenic pressure is resulting in large herbivore declines across many regions of Africa. And this sort of large-scale defaunation has major implications for ecological networks, or systems of interacting species. And these ecological networks tend to have two fundamental structures, or at least they could have one of two fundamental structures. The first is modularity, and the second is nestedness. And so in a modular network, you can see that these blue and green herbivore species are each eating different sets of plant species, which are represented by these black boxes. And so you can see that those are non-overlapping. Whereas in a nested network, you can see here that the green herbivore and the blue herbivore have overlapping diets. And another really important thing to notice here is that the green herbivore eats a smaller number of plants that are actually just a subset of the broader diet of this blue herbivore, creating this nested hierarchical structure. And so it's actually really important to know whether a dietary network is more modular or more nested and where it falls on that spectrum, because this degree of structure has implications for the stability of that network. So if you think about a modular network, if this green species goes extinct, then you've lost all of your connections to those two plant taxa. If they're not being eaten, they could really become dominant and out of control, or they could lose a major seed disperser, and therefore their populations could just plummet. Regardless of which of these things occurs, you're still having instability in the network. And so these modular networks, they're inherently less stable, and they're prone to secondary extinctions. Nested networks, on the other hand, if we lose this green herbivore, then we still have interactions with these two plant taxa via this blue herbivore. And so even though we've had one extinction, the network is still more stable and it's less prone to those secondary extinctions. And so what I really wanted to know is whether or not defaunation on Kenyan savannas was going to result in more nested or more modular dietary structures. So how we did that is about 11 years ago, the group that I'm part of set up a series of plots in central Kenya. And these control plots were ones where all savanna species are able to interact normally. And these exclusion plots use selective fencing to keep out all herbivores over 5 kilograms. So no giraffes, no elephants, no zebras, none of those megafauna that we all know and love. And you can see that after 11 years, defaunation makes a huge difference in African savannas. So vegetation increases in both abundance and diversity, and you get what essentially looks like a jungle instead of a savanna. And so to dig into that just a little more deeply, we collected 788 fecal samples from small mammals in both the control and the exclusion plots. We extracted dung from their DNA, and we used that to make dietary profiles, both for each individual sample, and then also for the dietary networks of the control and the exclusion plots. And bringing that back to the question that we've had about network structure, what we found is that nestedness does increase in response to defaunation in these small mammal dietary networks, which is a really exciting result, right? Because we've said that nestedness relates to stability, so it suggests a degree of stability that we didn't know if we would find in that network. So it's a cool result and one that we're excited about, but then the second question is, well, why? What is causing this? Because if we want this to be applicable and something that we can think about across systems, we need to understand the mechanism behind it. And so the small mammals in this system, they can be dietary specialists, meaning they really hone in on certain plants in the environment, or they can be dietary generalists, meaning that they eat a wide swath of what's available. And so we measured dietary specialization for each of those almost 800 samples. And what we found is that for specialist species, when you remove those large herbivores and you have these more abundant vegetation resources, they aren't specialists anymore. They become much more dietary generalists. Whereas the species that are generalists to begin with, they stay generalists. Their diets don't really change as much in terms of degree of specialization. And so what's really happening in these plots when you remove large herbivores is you have these specialists that are no longer really partitioning their diets to the degree that they were before, and they're eating these nested subsets of these larger generalist diets. And that's creating the nested network structure that we've been talking about. So it's an exciting result and one that suggests a degree of stability in this system. So this has been a lot for 4.5 minutes, and I just want to quickly recap on what we've talked about today. So first, we are asking how defaunation impacts the structure of small mammal dietary networks in Kenya. Second, we learned that defaunation actually promotes nestedness over modularity. We found that the underlying mechanism behind this is these species-level dietary changes that are then scaling up to affect the entire network architecture. And finally, we can be excited because we have here some evidence of a way that an ecological system is showing resilience in the face of environmental change. Thank you.